Have you read my book, Rainbow Girl, yet? If you're a longtime listener of the podcast, you've probably heard me mention my memoir before, but in case you haven't, let me tell you about it. Rainbow Girl, a memoir of autism and anorexia, takes you on my very personal and vulnerable journey of growing up undiagnosed autistic, how this led to the development of an eating disorder, and the steps I took to fully recover and turn my mess into my message. And while I could do the very autistic thing and go into several details of the book, I figured it would be way more valuable to read one of the reviews. Here's what Marianne in the Netherlands has to say. In a world that's only scratching the surface of the autistic experience with anorexia, Livia paints a candid picture of how she went against all odds to overcome her eating disorder and transform fear into strength. A must read for anyone in this situation, or helping someone in this situation, as is all her other online content. As a mother to a recently diagnosed autistic teenager with anorexia, this book gives me so much hope. To any medical professionals out there, please read this to gain immensely valuable insight into this complex interchange between these two conditions, so better help can be provided in the future. And now back to me. If you've already read Rainbow Girl and enjoyed the book, could you do me a 2-minute favor and leave a positive rating and review for the book on Amazon and Goodreads? It helps other people to find and read my story of lived experience so that together we can bring more awareness and compassion to this prevalent yet misunderstood connection. If you haven't yet read the book, grab your copy of either the ebook, paperback, or audiobook of Rainbow Girl today by visiting the link livelabelfree.com/Rainbow Girl. So again, that's livelabelfree.com/Rainbow Girl. Now, let's get back to today's episode. Hello, and welcome back to the Live Label Free podcast. I'm your host, Livia Sara, and today I'm joined by a fellow neurodivergent alien with lived experience of disordered eating, Dr. Marianne Miller. Welcome to the show, Marianne.
I'm so happy to be here.
Me too. I'm so excited because this conversation has been a long time coming. I have been on Marianne's podcast. We did a wonderful episode together, and we resonate on another dimensional level. I mean, I was recently on another podcast, and the host asked me, how would you describe authentic connection with one of your people? And I said, when you don't need words to know that you are communicating love and abundant energy, that there's just that exchange.
Love that.
And I don't even know where this came from, but I've come to call it the neurodivergent energy coalescence.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Can I get that on a t-shirt?
Well, that's just one of the multi-passionate projects in my mind of like, I want to create merch, but it's like, Livia, you want to do 1,000 different things. But yeah, so anyways, as most listeners of my show know, and I'm sure you resonate with Marianne, I'm a firm believer that listening to stories of lived experience is one of the most, if not the most, valuable ways to learn. And there's obviously so much to unpack when it comes to neurodivergence and eating disorders and disordered eating and all the moving parts of existentialism and things that, make up this web of complex factors. And I think, especially because every individual's journey with disordered eating, or as I prefer to call it, adaptive eating, is so unique. I do wanted to start off by you sharing some of your story. Can you tell our listeners who you are, what you do, and how you got here? And I'm sure from there we can go into multiple neurodivergent rabbit holes.
I love it. And I love how you call it adaptive eating, because that's just so much more like resilience focus instead of pathology or pathologically focused. Yeah. And that's, one of the many things I love about you is your take on that. So, Dr. Marianne Miller, I have a PhD in marriage and family therapy. And after I got that in 2003, I ended up moving to San Diego, California, and being a full-time professor at a university out here. And during that time, I began a side private practice. I was initially working with people with chronic pain and doing some couple work. Then I realized that my passion really was in working with eating disorders, and
Mhm.
our university was teaching a class or offering a class that summer that I sat in on and read all the textbooks and everything. And I just fell in love with it. So I got like a lot of additional training, and I had a
Mhm.
supervisor for a year. 13 years later, that's what I has been my passion. I left the university in 2018 because I realized I loved helping people in my private practice, kind of being in the trenches more than I did being in the ivory tower.
I
Yeah.
love that you use this metaphor of the ivory tower because, as you know from me and our podcast we recorded together, that was one of the ways in which I think traditional eating disorder treatment, alongside, all the other things that I'm sure we're going to get into today, can be so harmful, is that there's this hierarchy of I'm the clinician, I'm the professional, you're the sick patient that is incompetent. And us autistic people, this is an incredible strength we have, and I think it's what makes us leaders and problem solvers and creatives and all the positive things that come with that. We tend to be able to read right through people, like because we say what we mean, and we mean what we say with so much just purity. It's like if other people aren't doing that, our hypersensitivity is going to pick that right up. And
Mm.
I think, that's why before we started recording, we were talking about how I think, especially in this day and age of AI, authentic human connection is more important than anything, especially for us neurodivergent people, not to mention this political climate we're navigating. Like, now is our time to connect more than ever. And that's why I'm so grateful we're doing this podcast. So I know that a lot of people, who become very passionate about working with eating disorders and helping people in the trenches is because we were once in the trenches. So can you take us back to what led you to go into the trenches yourself? What was part of those trenches? Yeah, like what was Marianne growing up like, and what do you believe were some factors, specifically neurodivergent factors, that led you to develop issues with food? And you can be as detailed or as vague as your mind would like.
I love that question because I'm definitely late diagnosed. I'm self-diagnosed. I did consider getting an outside diagnosis, and then I chose not to for a couple of reasons. First, I trust myself and
Mhm.
I trust my brain, and when I do research, I do research. I
Oh,
dig,
yeah.
I dig deeply, as I'm sure a lot of you can relate to. And then just meeting a lot of people with lived experience with it, and then finding out that some of my friends, some of my very close friends, were diagnosed with like autism, and I was like, yeah, no
Yeah.
wonder.
Mhm.
It's like because we're like magnets. We
Oh,
that
yeah.
attract each other. So,
Yeah.
so I was always a really sensitive child
Mhm.
in terms of picking up on people's emotions,
Mhm.
picking up on like the energy of a room, even if a
Yeah.
room was empty. I could go in
Yep.
there and just sense the energy of the room. And there's so many examples of me feeling very uncomfortable in
Mhm.
social settings
Mhm.
and feeling frustrated, feeling like, can I just like figure out
Yeah.
the rules of this? And so what I would do is I would read, it was like back in the 80s, because I
Mhm.
graduated from high school in 91. So what I would do is I would read magazines like 17 magazine and Glamour magazine or whatever, because we
Mhm.
didn't have social media
Right.
back then. It was
For
way,
better or for
way
worse.
before, for better or for worse,
Yeah.
right? But like that's what defined the social
Mhm.
narrative of what a teen girl
Mhm.
should look like and should be like and should act.
Mhm.
I also grew up evangelical Christian, so there
Mhm.
were a lot of rules
Yep.
in how I should look like, how I should act. And a part of my autistic brain really liked the rules. And I was like, okay, I know what to do. But then I found like I was just experiencing so much anguish and emotional dissonance, you
Yeah.
know? I vividly remember I was in elementary school and they were doing like an art day talk, and my mom came in to talk about a painting,
Mhm.
famous painting or whatever. And I was sitting in the back, being very comfortable in the back with my head down, and I wasn't looking at anyone. And my mom was like so critical of me afterwards, like, you need to sit up with the popular kids and you need to look up and do all these things. And I got a lot of messages from her about being too loud too much. Is like, oh, boys don't like it when you laugh too loud. Boys don't like it when you talk too much. They like it when girls are demure and quiet and all
Oh my
those
God.
things.
So many thoughts. The demure thing is coming in my head right now. And have you seen the show Adolescence on Netflix?
No, it's a bit like too close to my job.
Yeah.
So,
Well, because everyone's talking about it, of course. But what you just said about like the boys won't like that kind of thing, it's reminding me of that dynamic. And I think there's so many things. Again, this is like my ADHD autistic brain being so excited that I'm almost overwhelmed by my excitement that I go into analysis paralysis. And I found that now, like actually openly saying that has been a huge part of what it means for me to embrace neurodivergence. Is in the past, I would have masked it. I would have pretended I had all my ducks in a row in my head, where silently I was crying and screaming inside. And the eating disorder was my escape hatch from the crying and screaming
yep,
inside.
yep,
And I think, and you're a therapist. So, of course, like talking through our processes helps us literally process it and then come out in a way that is so vulnerable that people appreciate it. Do you know Dr. Neff from the Neurodivergent Conversations podcast?
no, I don't.
Well, Megan Anna Neff and Patrick Casale, two neurodivergent beings, I'm going to call them. She was on my podcast and she grew up Catholic, and she told me that her religion became like her hyper focus,
Yeah,
almost like the eating disorder for me, and I'm sure for you too, to some extent, became this existential purpose of like, I am going to live in this little bubble of a world so I don't have to be faced with the questions about why I'm on this planet and why I feel so wrong and why I feel so broken. So I think it's really interesting that you bring up the religion piece, because it's very common in autistic people to have this hyper focused relationship. I'm not saying you had that specifically, but I think, with the rules is what can make it so enticing for a lot of autistic people. It's just like the eating disorder, right? It's the rules, it's the box, it's here are the boundaries, stay within the box, you're safe. I'd love to talk a bit about the existentialism piece, because I recently did a post on Instagram about that. Yes, people, I have decided to half come back on Instagram because I think I took a few months just completely away from it, like deleted the app from my phone, literally didn't look at it for 3 months. And it was this space away from it, especially with just all the bullshit going on these days, that almost proved to myself of like, I don't need this medium. I don't need to be on this medium because there was no longer this demand. I think that's what actually allowed me to feel like I can come back to this in a way that's fun for me. I have given up this idea of my feed having a theme and it doesn't all have to be the same font. I'm just going to post and create whatever I want, whenever I want. And this is what's going to make Instagram fun for me again. Although there's a lot of horrific stuff on there. But, anyways, this is my over explaining autistic self saying I did a post on how my eating disorder was my attempted solution to my existential crisis. And you commented on that post, which I loved. And I was like, oh my gosh, we should totally talk about this on the podcast. So I'd love to hear your experience or your spin on how the existentialism and the neurodivergence, undiagnosed, and the disordered eating and all these elements that you just described from your life growing up, how do you feel they contributed to the recipe that kind of led to the trenches.
Well, I remember thinking about like myself existentially very, very young. And I remember like nobody was really talking about that. And nobody was like
Hmm.
asking these, like, who am I in this universe? What is my purpose? Like, how do I exist?
Yep.
Like those kinds of things. And so I just kept it to myself. And it certainly wasn't in the rules of how I should behave. So I think I poured a lot of the existential like thoughts and questioning into the religion box. And that's where I looked for those answers. And I did get some, although there's always been a part of me that has questioned and pushed the boundaries, that I wasn't able to get the answers from the religion that I
Yep.
was looking for. And eventually I ended up leaving organized religion altogether, although I'm definitely spiritual. I think with the existentialism can come a lot of distress, and then also just the distress of not feeling like you fit in and looking for the meaning of things. When again, it just seemed like nobody else around me was asking these questions. It's like even the youth pastor wasn't encouraging us to think deeply about things.
Right.
Yeah.
Which only increases the existential loneliness, right?
Exactly. I remember feeling lonely a lot of the time, feeling as though I just feeling at my core that something was wrong with me, feeling like I was broken, feeling like I was a failure because of some inner core of who I am and who I was. And I'd say again, I think the religion was like a temporary patch that gave me some relief, but it wasn't enough
Right.
because with this
Yeah.
huge missing piece of me being autistic and I just nowadays just being able to unmask in so many more settings just brings me so much more sense of peace and alignment and authenticity, that the existential distress and existential loneliness really quiets down. And then connecting with the autism
Mhm.
community, what did you call it? Like the collective or something cool,
Neurodivergent energy coalescence.
coalescence. Yeah.
Yeah, because
That,
I just love that word because coalescence, when I think of the word coalescence, I mean, everything in my mind is a picture. It's like a movie. One of my clients described it as there's constantly a movie that's going way too fast playing in your head. When I think of this word coalescence, I see what, obviously, I can't see the universe, but what I would imagine the universe looks like, those intergalactic photos and the galaxy photos. I have that image in my head, and then I have like two golden neurodivergent sun beings like colliding and then creating an explosion of loving energy. That's what I see in
oh
my
my
mind
gosh, I love
when
that
I
so
think of
much.
neurodivergent. Yeah, I joke with my sister who is purely ADHD, so doesn't have the autism piece, and she's an incredible artist, and we have this incredible neurodivergent energy coalescence in the sense that I have the exact picture of what I want portrayed visually in my head for like my book covers, for example. She's illustrated all of them, but I do not. I can write, that's my art, but I cannot for the life of me draw or create images or anything like that. And we have this neurodivergent energy coalescence where I can explain to her something in my chaotic words, and in 3 minutes she'll have a sketch of exactly what I have in my head. And like I don't think I could have that with a non-neurodivergent person.
Yeah, and I've been feeling that way even during this conversation. The things that you were talking about, even just discussing existential crisis and or existential distress and some of the other things you've mentioned during the podcast, I just was like, yeah, like that was and is so my experience. And I do have a lot of like those visualizations, but it made me laugh when you talked about like being out in the universe because one of my special interests is Star Wars. If you put it in
heavy.
Star Wars terms, I
Yeah.
think that would help me.
Yeah, I mean, it's no wonder that I think many autistic people are fascinated by stars and galaxies and space because we are so relentlessly curious. We don't take anything at face value. We want to know why, what's underneath this. And although,
Mm,
again, that is our gift and our strength, and it's what allows us to, in my book, I say, find gems that neurotypical people cannot sniff out. It can equally be debilitating when you are trapped in a human body on planet Earth because your infinite being is being constricted by not only a human body, but by the system. And I mean, at this point, I'm not even going to elaborate on what I mean when I say the system, because I think we can all know what I mean when I say the system. But I think as a neurodivergent human coming into this world, you feel trapped on so many levels that you are going to look for an escape route wherever you can. And that is where the addictions come in. That's where the anxiety comes in. That's where the eating disorder comes in as not a pathological problem, but as an attempted solution to the underlying sense of alienation. Do you feel lonely and misunderstood on your eating disorder recovery journey? Are you exhausted by traditional recovery approaches that just don't make sense for the neurodivergent brain? So much of the recovery content out there pushes intuitive eating without understanding the challenges with interoception and nervous system regulation. You're told to be spontaneous with food when you've always thrived on routine. They insist you completely eliminate numbers like scales or calorie counting without becoming curious as to how you can actually use these traits to your advantage in recovery. Now, I don't know about you, but this traditional advice always made me feel like a failure. It made me believe that, no matter what I did, the eating disorder would always take up at least some of my brain space. But I've got some uplifting news for you. It is 100% possible to find food and movement freedom as an autistic person. You just need an approach that embraces neurodivergence rather than pathologizes it. And this is exactly why I created the Autistically ED-free membership, an online safe space to connect with other amazing humans that are living the autistic ED experience right alongside you. Through weekly group coaching calls, a 24/7 private community, and a growing library of previously recorded calls, the Autistically ED-free membership is your one-stop shop for all things autism and eating disorders. So whether you're an individual wanting to discover what full recovery even looks like for you, or you're a parent of an incredible child, or maybe you're a professional seeking to better serve your clients, I invite you to join the community on our journey to discovering out-of-the-box creative approaches to your neurodivergent version of freedom from ED. To learn more about the Autistically ED-free membership and secure your spot in our growing community, visit livelabelfree.com/membership. So that's livelabelfree.com/membership. And I'll also leave the link in the show notes. And now, let's get back to today's episode. I'm curious for you because you posted a lot on your Instagram and your podcast about having struggled with atypical anorexia, and I have already established that you are going to be a better reader for the book I'm currently working on. It's about, the adaptive eating spectrum and why I want to remove the term eating disorder altogether and even the pathologizing of autism and neurodivergence. I was talking about atypical anorexia in that book, and it is important for me when I talk about certain topics to put a big footnote of I am someone who has thin privilege. I have always inhabited a smaller body, so it is not my place to pretend like I know what it is like for someone with quote unquote atypical anorexia to experience that diagnosis. Again, it sounds so clinical, but to basically have your entire screaming for validation and trying to fit in, not even that not being validated because you don't fit into the diagnostic box of proper anorexia, let's just say. So I'm really curious, kind of, can you share, if you feel comfortable, what kind of led to that, and how did your environment react to that?
Yeah, whenever I say or think about atypical anorexia, it's always in quotes because there
Mm-hmm.
really isn't a typical anorexia.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, so is there a good anorexia where
Yeah.
people have thin bodies? So I really want to deconstruct and dismantle any sort of hierarchy that might come across with
Yeah.
that. But I think when I'm in elementary school, I was put on diets by my mom and then ended up, you know, choosing to go on diets myself. But, I always
Mm-hmm.
think in elementary school, like, I'm following something,
Yeah.
lot big diet culture family that I grew up on. And so if you feel bad, then you must lose weight because
Right.
then it'll help you feel better. Well, I felt
Yep.
bad all the time
Yeah.
because I was not diagnosed and I was having all this distress.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know one thing that I can do to help me feel like I can like get a commodity, be almost a social commodity, is I can get a thin body or a
Mm-hmm.
thinner body.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember when I think I was like 11 or 12. I don't even remember how much weight, but
Well, it's not important, right?
it's really
It's
totally not
not even
important.
important. Yeah.
No, but they like, oh my gosh, it's like I had gone and visited the moon, by myself as an astronaut, like the way that people were acting. And as a child, it felt so like, I know disenfranchised is like a loaded word, but just felt just like I didn't fit in ever. It's like, oh, I got kind of like feeling like I did. And then also, if I was thinking about food and eating all the time and my body image, then I didn't have to think about the loneliness
Right.
and the existential distress that I was experiencing. So I lost weight, but wouldn't have met the BMI criteria that a lot of insurance companies have of,
Mhm.
you have to have a certain low BMI or be below a certain number in order to get insurance coverage in some cases or get insurance treatment for anorexia. And I know it used to be in the DSM, but they took it out in the DSM-5, but they do talk about like being at a lower weight. And so I was at a low weight for me,
Yeah.
which wasn't like what people typically think of as anorexic.
What
So like people weren't
according to BMI, yeah.
according to BMI, which is a bunch of bullshit, as we all know.
Right.
And so I had all the symptoms. I ate very little during the day. I vividly remember going through middle school and just like counting my calories, just eating very, very little. And it got to the point where, it was around the time that my period should have started, but it didn't.
Hmm.
And so I think I actually had one period when I was 11
Hmm.
and then I began restricting and then it just stopped completely. And I didn't have another one for 2 years.
Yeah, my family is historically like late bloomers, and for me, my eating disorder started when I was 11. So I actually didn't get my first period until I was almost 19, because that's when I decided to recover. And in so many ways, I think, especially again for the autistic body, not going through puberty, not having a period, not having to deal with the sensory aspects of that, that was one of the perks of the eating disorder. I didn't have to deal with the physical changes, A, and B, something I hear a lot, and I've done separate podcasts on this, is the fear of being healthy in this world. What if I can't handle being a meaningful member of society? And that all ties back to the existentialism. What if I am wrong in this world?
The fear of not being able to handle things
Yeah.
was so real. And
Mm,
everybody just said, oh, it's just anxiety. It's anxiety. It's anxiety.
yeah.
It's like, no, like I was so overstimulated all of the time. Like my sensory sensitivities are very, very strong. And so it was a completely valid question for me to say, I don't know if I can handle it.
Yeah.
Because, like, in many ways, from a sensory perspective, it's, you really can't,
Right.
when you try to push yourself through it. But when you look at it from just like a general anxiety disorder lens, it's like, oh, you need to just
A
go
cup
through
of
this
tea.
and be exposed, go through exposure therapy and all that stuff. It's like, no, I need to take care of my sensory needs. And so just being for decades feeling very misunderstood by even the mental health system and labels with all these labels put on me
Yeah.
that I really is not something I experience. It's like I don't have panic attacks. I thought I had panic attacks all the time. No, I have like autistic meltdowns.
Yeah.
I have freaking autistic meltdowns. I thought I burnt out because I was a perfectionist. No, I burn out because it's autistic burnout.
Right.
And it just has changed the way I've looked at everything. And I think eating food, I mean, my eating disorder went through very many iterations, but when I could hyper focus on restriction, I think that it was incredibly, it just crowded out a lot of the noise in my head and a lot of the feelings. And then I said, well, but I have a thinner body, so I can feel good about myself.
Yeah.
So it like gave me confidence to help me interact socially in a very neurotypical way, and
Mhm.
which really wasn't the true me.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up about the thinner body, like, oh, now I can have the confidence. Because I think from like an autistic masking perspective, it's
Mm,
almost an attempted way to compensate for that
yes.
existential feeling of I'm wrong.
Yes.
It's like my
Yes.
being is wrong, but if I make my body right, I can,
Yes.
yeah. And what you said about the panic attacks and the anxiety, no, these were autistic meltdowns. I think there's an element of how the restriction itself can compound with that. Because for me, as a kid, I had meltdowns, but my parents never considered like, oh, this is possibly like autistic trait because I was so highly masking. Like even my meltdowns, I would have in silence in my room in my bed because I didn't because it was vulnerable and I didn't want anyone to see that I was weak because oh my gosh, then I was wrong.
Yeah.
So many of my meltdowns were just, the silent dying inside and having no one see that on the outside. And for me, the eating disorder was just, again, it was the escape hatch. It was the side pathway on this road that was filled with neurotypical bumps everywhere that was so unpredictable. I couldn't navigate it. So when I was in the throes, in the trenches of my anorexia, when it was to the point of like I was reaching, that last straw moment of like if I didn't turn things around, like things could have I probably wouldn't even be here. Like I was in those like months. And at that point, every single day I would have panic attacks. Like definitely panic attacks because my brain was absolutely starving to the point where rational thought did not exist anymore. If it was 3 almonds and not four, like oh, like this is the
Yep.
end of my life. And if other people
Yeah.
don't understand that this is the end of my
No.
life, it would escalate. Anyways, when I finally went to treatment, they said, yeah, like the panic attacks are caused by the malnutrition. At this point, we didn't know about the autism. I think fair enough. However, later on, after I was quote unquote weight restored, whatever that means, but I was, I was physically healthy for my body. I was having quote unquote panic attacks, which I now know are autistic meltdowns, but artistic meltdowns sounds cool too. um,
I want an artistic meltdown.
well, I think the word autistic and artistic can basically be the same thing because we are artists.
We
We are
are.
creatives.
I know.
So anyways, when I was in quasi recovery. I was physically doing a lot better, but mentally, I was still slowly dying inside. I would have these autistic meltdowns at, people just not accommodating what at the time I didn't yet know was neurodivergence, but I felt like they weren't accommodating me. They weren't seeing me. They weren't listening to me, what I was saying. And I would have these meltdowns. And I remember my mom being like, have you been restricting again? Because this is exactly what happened during the eating disorder. And it would be so invalidating because I'm like, oh, no, no, like this has nothing to do with that. And it wasn't until later that we could really see, same presentation, different root cause. And that's why, when it comes to healing from an eating disorder as a neurodivergent person, so important to always come back to that word intention, because I know for a lot of my autistic clients, counting calories to like actually eat more is actually a way that they're using this number attachment trait to
Yep.
help them. But it
Yep.
doesn't help for everyone. Like I can't count
No.
calories anymore now. That would not be helpful to
Yeah,
me.
me neither.
But when I was in a certain phase of my recovery, I needed to like I didn't know how to
Yeah.
eat if I couldn't count something.
Yeah. I mean, I see a lot of RFID clients, and so sometimes that really, really helps them is weighing themselves and seeing the numbers and being able to count,
Mhm.
so it it's interesting. I think there's something like I think counting calories is can be like a form of stimming, because
Mhm.
that's what I would do in my mind is just go over the calories.
Yeah.
And you know what I do now, though? Now I just count in different ways.
Me
So I
too.
count from 100, to 100, 100 down to 1. I studied French, and so I count to 100 in French and from 100 down to French. I know some Russian because I lived there in Russia for a year, and so I count as high as I can go and remember in Russian. I took like an Italian class. I did that too. But by doing that, it's a form of stimming that helps me when I'm like having an intense conversation with like my husband or something like
Mhm.
that. And I know visibly like rocking or doing my other kinds of stimming would be really distracting for him. So
Right.
I just count and it helps me. It helps me so much. There has to be an overlap in my mind. It's like there's
Oh,
something about the counting of calories that is maybe a form of stimming or self-soothing.
I love that you say that because I think what we're almost doing right now is we're inviting curiosity to what often is labeled as OCD behaviors. Could these be forms of
Oh
stimming?
my gosh, I was totally misdiagnosed as OCD
Me too.
by my eating disorder
Me
therapist.
too.
And so forever I thought I was, but there was something about it. I was like, it just doesn't seem like it fits, but okay, she says this. And then it's like,
Yeah.
no,
Right.
I'm doing all things to my stimming, and it's my self-soothing, and it's
Right. And what is
coping.
ultimately the point of stimming is regulating yourself, feeling
Yes.
safe. And the numbers, because I, do a lot of writing and trying to process things and figure out, okay, well, why does the autistic mind work this way? And with the numbers and the counting calories and the weight and all that, it's you're turning the abstract,
Yes.
intangible concepts of life, you're turning them into something that you can see and feel and touch.
Something concrete.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's exactly, again, what the eating disorder gives you, because
Yep.
existential questions, by their very nature, will never have an answer. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an existential question. Whereas with
Yep.
the eating disorder, it always has the answers, an apple or a cookie. Oh, the apple, duh. Like,
Hmm.
the high calorie milkshake or the light ice cream. Oh, duh. Like, the answers are so black and white, but like always
Yeah.
on the same side, that's what makes it tangible and graspable, even though, of course, in eating, the concept of eating disorder itself is the most intangible, complex thing. That's why no one understands that. Because how
Hmm.
can we? Because they're a manifestation of feeling unsafe, which you can never make tangible, because safety is not something you can ever grasp. And I've come to the conclusion in my own life that anything truly important cannot be grasped, like love and abundance and trust and safety. And I am someone who is not materialistic at all because of this awareness now. Like I used to be. I used to have all, the Teletubbies.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, my room, like every crevice, every wall was filled with the Teletubbies. And I was like, if one of them didn't match the other one, like no, that was not okay. But I think just because of all the work that I've done in my recovery and learning, what is really important to me in life, and that is connection, contribution, and creativity, I believe that is the purpose of life for me, at least. That is my existential purpose. And even that, I can't get too tied to that, because otherwise we go down the whole other spiral of, well, who am I when I'm not creating and connecting and contributing, which is something that I currently struggle with a lot.
So do I. Yeah.
And in that sense, I think it is so important to have these conversations about recovering from an eating disorder doesn't magically make your life happier and better and beautiful. And that's
No.
why when I see these reels on Instagram of like when I had anorexia, and then you see someone like crying in front of their pasta, and then you see this whole what do you call it, like sequence of photos of them smiling and
Oh,
dancing.
montage. Yeah.
I'm like, this is so not real. Like, this is such a highlight reel, literally, because arguably for me, the existential suffering actually increased after my eating disorder.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I
And
see that with my clients
and
too.
no one is talking about that.
No, no one is talking about that. Yeah. Because if we see eating disorders as a form of masking,
Hmm.
um, the existential distress and crisis underneath is underneath it. So you're
Totally.
so preoccupied by the food, eating, and body image stuff. So when that settles down and calms down, then this existential experience, feelings and thoughts about that just really, really come up. And it's difficult for a lot of neurotypicals. And I think even neurodivergent people don't
Hmm.
quite understand it. So the fact that you're exploring it and looking into it is really a beautiful thing. I did want to circle back to like the difference between OCD
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
being autistic is I was thinking about this the other day, and I think with OCD, it's more like the what you do actually makes you feel distressed.
Hmm.
People who have OCD, so it's like, so if you wash your hands 100 times or check your locks like a certain number of times
Yeah.
every night, it actually can cause distress versus using things that are like stimming, and doing repetitive movements actually causes you to relax. It causes your
That's
nervous system to calm down.
right. That's so interesting. Yeah, because what you see with OCD a lot is that like there's this they check the locks 100 times and it's still not okay. Like it's still not okay. Whereas with the autism piece, like once we've checked it, it's done. I feel safe. I'm
Yep.
fine. I checked it.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
so interesting.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like,
it's not like this bottomless pit thing. It's like, oh gosh, yeah, now I feel better. Now I can like do the thing that I need to do, you know?
right, it's like the OCD, it's when it's true OCD, the OCD fuels the OCD. Whereas when it's
Exactly.
autism, the behavior actually relieves the anxiety that is a
Oh,
result of unaccommodated autism.
I think I need to do a podcast episode on that.
I'm like, while we're having this conversation, I'm sure you do the same. I'm like silently thinking of like topic, like title ideas, and I'm like, we definitely need to have like the word existentialism in there. We definitely need to have the
Yeah,
word OCD in there. I'm like,
yeah.
existentialism, OCD. Oh my, Dr.
Oh my
Mary.
gosh.
Yeah, no,
Oh, that's
I'm gonna
awesome.
have to have fun with this.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's always my favorite part of like, how can I succinctly write an enticing title that's of course never going to encompass the depth and breadth of the
Right.
conversation, but get
Right.
someone to be curious, like, ooh, what is this? And
Right.
I know that with the existential piece, like I have one podcast solo episode I did a while ago titled Existential Suffering After an Eating Disorder, with after in all caps. And that is one
Yeah.
one of my most listened to episodes. And I'm like, that's not a coincidence. It's because no
Mm.
one is talking about it.
No. And it's so common. I mean, again, I had it, my clients have had it, and they're like, what's wrong with me? The eating disorder is over. Why am I feeling this way? And it's like, this was there all the time.
That's what your
You know,
eating disorder attempted to solve,
this exactly.
right?
Yeah.
This
This,
was,
yep.
yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, Marianne, I know that we could literally talk for hours, and I feel like people say that on podcasts all the time. Like, we could talk for hours and then not mean it. But like whenever I say it, I'm like, oh no, I mean what I say and I say what I mean.
Yes, exactly.
And I want to be so respectful of our neurodivergent, energetic time boundaries. So I am curious for you, is there anything else that you feel like you wanted to elaborate on, or anything else you want to share or give to our listeners before we bring this conversation into a full infinity loop?
I love the infinity loop. One thing I love about you is that you unmask unapologetically,
Thank you.
and that inspires me because, I have an academic PhD, but I also have a PhD in masking.
Mhm.
And with especially with my generation, Gen X, it's like, so my journey of realizing that I'm autistic has been a journey in unmasking. And the more that I do it, the better I feel. And it is interesting to see who I'm becoming. And I mean, again, I don't think it's like something that wasn't always there. It's just something that's just been repressed. And I use the
Mhm.
word repressed very intentionally.
Mhm.
Repressed by society, repressed by my family of origin. Although, they didn't know, nobody knew back then. And then repressed by religion, repressed by sexism and misogyny. And so lifting off the yoke of masking has been an amazing thing and so good for my mental health and my relationships. I just feel more relaxed. So you're an
Yeah.
inspiration, and
Thank
thank you
you.
for being you.
Thank you. That really means a lot to me, especially now, because I have this constant sense of, no matter what I do, I'll never be good enough. I'm sure
I
you can
know.
relate to that.
Yeah, I know.
Especially in today's world, it's like the amount of times I ask myself at the end of the day, what for? What for? What am I doing all of it for? And conversations like these are a gentle, loving hug of, this is what you're doing it for.
You're doing it for people like me who need examples and models and words to describe our experience. And I thank you for what you're doing.
And I thank you equally. So, thank you, Dr. Marianne, for coming on the podcast and having this very meaningful conversation that has not only benefited us mutually, but I know is going to benefit neurodivergent beings beyond this call. So, very excited for everyone to listen. And then, lastly, where can everyone find you and connect with you if they want to get in touch?
Sure. I'm at my website, drmariannemiller.com. My first name is spelled the French way, Marianne. On Instagram, it's at Dr. Marianne Miller. So those two places are where I hang out.
And I
And with my podcast too, it's the Dr. Marianne Land, an eating disorder recovery podcast. And yeah, check out the episode where Livia guested. We talked about how eating disorder treatment is not
yeah.
neurodivergent affirming. So
Yeah.
it's a great episode.
Thank you. Yeah, and I will be sure to put all the links to Marianne's socials and website and podcast in the show notes for easy access. All right. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And I will talk to you next time. Bye bye for now.